Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Tom Woods Show, episode 2529, with our old friend Carla Gericke. Carla, do we say you are President Emeritus of the, or Emerita of the Free State Project?
Indeed, and now I have a new presidency to add to the growing list.
Right, so that's what we want to talk to you about. I mean, you just were on with Dr. Phil, and now you're on with me. So, but the Dr. Phil thing, that's really quite something.
It was a big deal, but I'd rather be on with you.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. But what on earth topic is it that you're on to talk about with Dr. Phil?
So this great opportunity knocked at my door and I seized it with both hands, and I got to talk about New Hampshire independence and the launching of this new initiative I'm doing, NHExit now, or Nexit, as in we're next. And the invitation was originally to Nexit, and then they sort of expanded it when they realized, oh, there were a lot of independence movements kind of jumping up all over America, and that this is a pretty big story. So I got to go on Dr. Phil. I got to say my bit, and I can tell you a little bit about the backstory if you're interested. I mean, it was a really interesting, fun, great experience, and they said they might have me back. So I'm hoping it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Well, that is tremendous. Now, let's talk about, so the new initiative that you have is called?
Nexit Now.
Okay, so the H is silent?
I guess just because I want it to sound like Nexit, like it's going to happen next, and, you know, Brexit and Texit. So NHExit, we could do it. I don't know. I'm making it up as we go along. If you think we shouldn't do Nexit and we should do NHExit, I'm open to suggestions.
I was waiting to hear what you were going to say. I am happy no matter what you do. But I guess my first question to you is, it seems the public is not ready for this. Like this seems so beyond where the Overton window is that people are shocked and outraged that you're even talking about it. So how do you start from there?
So are they shocked and outraged that we're talking about it? I mean, national divorce is trending quite often and on X. So we know that there is an appetite. Those words are coming out. The fact that Dr. Phil thought it necessary to do an episode on it, I think, is pretty telling. And honestly, the first episode, so the entire show is like 42 minutes, right? So they've edited into 2 different episodes on YouTube. The first part already has over 1 million views. It's only came out 5 days ago. There are over 7,000 comments, and they're all pro secession. So I actually think that the issue is more appealing to the man on the street, the ordinary people who are paying taxes, who realize this financial situation is not sustainable, and it's not popular with the establishment. But I think it's a mistake to say that there isn't somewhat of an appetite. Now, of course, also as people who believe in talking about ideas, you know, someone has to start the conversation, and it's a pretty strong anchor to push that Overton window. And of course, here in New Hampshire, where we do have the Free State Project and where we have been concentrating libertarians in the great state of New Hampshire for the past 15 to 20 years, this seems like the right spot to be having those discussions.
It seems as if the way it normally works is that, let's say the other side of things proposes something that nobody's ever thought of, but they have the benefit of the media being on their side, all the opinion molders being on their side, and academia. And soon it seems like a bandwagon, an avalanche of support for this, whatever this thing is. And they give the impression to the public that this idea that no one's ever heard of is overwhelmingly supported by their fellow citizens, which is not true. It's supported by the elites and people who are obsessed with whatever the elites are obsessed with. We don't have that benefit. So at the very least, we can say we have a much tougher road ahead when we're trying to promote something that's not on the radar.
Right. No, I think that is true. And actually, one of the things that I found amusing as I was doing my show prep for this, one of the lines in the Dr. Phil show, he's talking to Daniel Miller, who's the founder and the spokesperson for Nexit. So that's a big movement out of, it's the Texas nationalist movement. It's a different flavor to what we're doing up here, which is sort of interesting. I think all the states have a different kind of vibe or reason. For them, obviously, immigration is more important, although we have an immigration problem with the Massachusetts people on our southern border. So there's that. But, one of the lines that he got applause for is he took Daniel Miller to task and he was like, that kind of talk is reckless.
Well, remind people who Daniel Miller is.
He's the founder of Nexit, so the Texas nationalist movement. And so, and Daniel kind of was shocked, like, what? Reckless? But then when I went to pull the URLs for you to send, I was looking at the way they framed it on YouTube. And I was like, is it reckless to talk about ideas, or is it literally reckless to, like, his graphics are all like very like, whoa. And it's like, is America about to enter civil war? And he's like, economics collapse coming and civil war, we're in trouble. And I was like, so who is reckless? The people trying to have a cogent, intelligent conversation about the real issues that are facing this country. And we could get into that in a hot second. But, the economics it's not looking good out there. So I found that very interesting, right? Like he wants to color talking about the issues negatively, but then when they're doing their promos and putting their information out there, it is extremely inflammatory. And in fact, when so a few things, I'll just back up for a second. So first of all, they treated me really well. It's the fanciest kind of thing I've done, right? Like I was flown out. There were cars that picked me up. They did makeup. There was wardrobe. There was all of that. That was really wonderful. But then the producer actually, so they put you in your green room at the start of the morning. And that's, I flew out the Saturday and then they record on the Monday. And Dr. Phil actually records 2 shows back to back. So we were the second show. So they put you in the green room around 8:00 in the morning. And then they only bring you out at about 1 in the afternoon. So that's a lot of time to be sort of stewing on your own in a room, right? Like you're like, am I going to get nervous? How many breathing exercises can I do? How much can I meditate? Do I know all my facts? Like all of that, right? And then the producer came in and I could hear him through the wall telling the other guests, oh, these are your talking points, try and hit this and everything. But apparently I was just, a woman from New Hampshire. And he came in and he was like, for you, I only have 2 instructions. No one-word answers. And girl, you better bring it. And I was like, he doesn't know what he just did. So I decided to, bring it. And so we had a lot of conversations. But, for you who've known me such a long time and sort of probably watched my evolution in terms of like being comfortable with public speaking and all of that, right? So I thought, well, I'm going to bring it and I'm not going to give any one-word answers. But also, I've been trained in the art of how to do these conversations. So I kind of knew, they're going to frame it the Civil War way. And so I thought, I'm going to get ahead of this before the other guests get up there so that if anything, I at least get, that out. And so I actually posited on the show, why do we have to use Civil War as the anchor for this conversation? They're the ones bringing the threat of violence and the history of violence to the table. Whereas there are a lot of us who are like, I'd say I'm more academic or, where it's like, hey, we need to start talking about these actual issues. And, and so I think, the enemies of liberty or the people who aren't ready for this, we need to guide them and help them understand it doesn't have to be framed as a civil war, as a warlike thing. I think it's an economic discussion at this stage. And, it took This is such a mind-blowing little stat to me. I shared this on X last week. I actually stole it from Pete St. Onge over at Heritage, who I see, by the way, that Elon's starting to retweet. So I was like, oh, so that was nice to see. And he might even have retweeted this one. So the conversation is getting out there, but it took 192 years for DC to accumulate its first $1 trillion in national debt. And it's taken us 100 days to add the last trillion. So, we're in that compound interest, the money is just going stage of things. And I can tell you practically, when we introduced the constitutional amendment this year, that CACR 32, the original one was 32, this one was 20. And I think you and I did a show on it. We put in a triggering event that said, if the national debt reaches $40 trillion, then we can put it on the ballot so that granite staters can decide, is this the sinking ship we want to go down with, or can we do better? That was $40 trillion. When I put that bill in, there was $33 trillion in debt. We're already over $34 trillion, and it's been like less than half a year. So, whether people want to talk about it, whether they say they have the appetite for it, all of those things, the point is the problems are not being solved and they're not going away. And indeed, they're compounding. And so I'm a solution-driven person, and I'm like, how do we fix this? And I know because I chose New Hampshire as my home, I can't fix the world, but I can do something about what happens here. And so that's what I'm going to do.
Hey, everybody, one of the best events of the year is coming up, and I'm so excited to tell you about it. It's put on by my friend Mikkel Thorpe. It's the world's largest offshore event taking place entirely online from October 7th to 11th. Mikkel is host of the Expat Money Show, a multiple-time Tom Woods Show guest, and a highly sought-after expat consultant with over 2 decades of experience. Discover why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. Learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect Plan B, how to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. And guess what? Ol Woods here is going to be making a presentation at the Expat Money Summit, along with other names you'll be familiar with like Mark Faber, Doug Casey, Ron Paul, and more. To reserve your complimentary ticket, head over to expatmoneysummit.com. That's expatmoneysummit.com. Well, what about people who say this is some crazy idea and it runs counter to American principles and you're some kind of traitor or this, that, or the other thing? I mean, well, let's forget about the bringing up the Confederacy because they're too far gone if they're doing that. But that is going to be the response you get. Most people don't know any of the history, or they don't know Jefferson's compact theory of the Union or anything like that. So they're going to think that this is some kind of, unlawful, maybe even indeed insurrection. How do you correct them?
Yeah, so I think that is part of that conversation again, where it's like, well, let's not just get caught up in whatever we've been told historically. Also, as someone who is actually an immigrant to the States, I've never thought geography was destiny. I've never thought your history means you have to be stuck in this perpetual cycle of whatever. Even as a lawyer, I can tell you the precedent system in jurisprudence actually can cause a lot of problems too, because when you have to right a wrong, it might take 50 years to overturn whatever the bad case was. So for me, the historic thing, sure, people want to use the scary words. They want to say civil war. They want to say traitor. They want to say insurrectionist. They want to use all these words. But the reality is, and we are still in a facts-based reality world, if people like it or not, is I am here. I am advocating for it. I am advocating for it peacefully. And the reason I am doing it is because I love America, because I love American values, because I actually did learn more about America as an immigrant than probably the average Joe who's about to call me a traitor did. And what I'm going to build here in New Hampshire is America 2.0, because you know what? America 1.0 isn't actually functioning under the Constitution. We're building an empire. We're broke. It's not working. And I would say America has actually been hijacked by communists. I mean, if we're going to get down to brass tacks. And so I'm doing the most American thing you can do. And to the people who call me a traitor, I also say America was born from secession. It is our literal roots. And so I think what I'm doing is actually going back to our core principles and saying we aren't sticking to what the compact or compound was. And so let's see if we can reimagine something for the future, and not only reimagine something, but, we have a little more technology than at 1776. Maybe we could do some cool stuff with competing currencies and blockchain, citizenship and digital stuff. And, who knows? I mean, I think the sky is the limit once you start imagining what would it look like if I had to build a country. And that actually is a really fun and amazing thought experiment. And I would actually invite your listeners and viewers to think about that. Maybe we start a contest for like Portfest or something, and we make all the nerds do a build your own country board game, and everyone brings their board game, and it has to be based in New Hampshire if I'm making stuff up right now. and we kind of see what people think. So instead of being caught up in this like negative spiral of watching literally the Titanic go down, I'm interested in going, hey, let's do cool new stuff. What can we do? How can we make this better? How can we do it better next time? Probably with a little more property rights. But, people are going to call me names. People have been calling me names for a really long time at the stage where I don't really care. And name calling seems to be sort of politics du jour. But for those of us who actually have ideas, I'm like, can we move beyond that and actually address issues?
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of people have what I wish I knew who came up with this term, but is sometimes called a status quo bias. So the way things are is the way they have to be. And if you can argue for change within certain limited parameters, but you can't blow the parameters away, you can't raise an issue that no one else is talking about, you can't make me rethink my fundamental assumptions. None of that's allowed. I mean, yeah, we can talk about what the tax rate should be, but we can't talk about whether New Hampshire can be independent, because we all know that's ridiculous. We just know that. There's no argument necessary. So that's frustrating, is the status quo bias, to get people to, even, for example, I was talking to people in the Greater Idaho movement, and that just has to do with taking part of Oregon that is absolutely unrepresented in Oregon politics, absolutely unrepresented, and allow it to join with Idaho. Now, this is the most trivial change in world history. I mean, there is no decree from heaven that says Oregon has to look like this and Idaho has to look like that. Could you imagine anybody in Europe believing that we would even be arguing about what Idaho has to look like? But yet, because no one's allowed to talk about it, people implicitly treat Idaho as if it is a sacred thing, not to be touched or changed by 1 square inch. And so if you talk about something that, again, if you could just get away from all the preconceptions, is obviously a trivial difference, you try to bring that up, you can't even talk about that because that's crazy. Why would that be crazy? Maybe this works better for people. There's nothing sacred about these dumb border lines, nothing sacred about Oregon and Idaho. They're just arrangements that maybe they work, maybe they don't. Maybe they help people, maybe they don't. We just test it out. We see what happens. And I mean, I know I keep coming back to this, but there's nothing particularly wild about proposing that maybe this line should go like this rather than like that. Big deal.
Yeah, and even something I was thinking about it earlier this week, because I didn't grow up in America, I'm also willing to concede that my sense of this is probably slightly different to, an American. I mean, I do love this country. I chose to become an American citizen, and I am one. So, those are actual active choices, right? If we're talking about mindset and what changes mindset and all of that. But, because I did not grow up seeing the socialist Bellamy Pledge of Allegiance, right? but most Americans did. And so when you think about it this will sound a little funny, right? But from a mind control perspective, and what I mean with that term is neural programming, i.e. things that are repeated over and over until you take them as sort of the gospel. And, with the Pledge of Allegiance, most people, if you just went to school every day, you probably have said the pledge, like 2,340 times, like rough math here. In your life, you have said the words, the union is indivisible, right? So you have neural programming that is making you think a certain way about stuff. So really the question becomes, how do you shake people out of this like very firm sense of, what it is, right? Like a Dr. Phil, who actually, to his credit, was listening until he got to the end. And then you realize, he has a scripted monologue that, he had already made up his mind. It didn't matter what we said on that stage. They were going to say, this is crazy and reckless and the union and blah, blah, blah. But here is the other reality. Chris Sununu actually has called me, I think he called the idea crazy. I forget if he called me specifically crazy, right? But there's this sort of note from even the Republicans, and I'm running for office again, so that's always fun when I have to go to those meetings. But they think it's so outlandish, or it's like this crazy, I think was your word, idea. But here's the thing: ideas are only crazy until they're not, right? You could be a pioneer and you could be out there and you could be crazy until 10 years from now, if we have had a dollar collapse and people are really genuinely struggling and we're, hand to mouth and all the things, the doom and gloom that I do not want to call into my life. But, if the reality of what we as Austrians kind of see needs to be the next thing that happens, because how much debt can we actually make? I mean, BRICS is real. That is happening. Like the de-dollarization is happening, right? And we saw the markets, this week have taken kind of a wild ride and dive as well. And so people say now it's a premature idea. But if we do the work now, hopefully maybe we never need it. But maybe, in 10 years' time, it's like, thank God that lady we used to call crazy sat down and figured out a plan so that this can happen. And the other thing is, here's the thing, right? So when people say to me, you can't do this, really all Nexit now is asking for is we're saying we want to be a free, independent, prosperous nation governed by the people of New Hampshire, right? So what's ludicrous about that? All we're talking about is making the unit smaller from 50 to 1. And if someone has a problem with that, then I would like them to explain to me why Israel or the Ukraine can exist.
Yeah, it's weird that it's okay, according to these people, when other countries divide or, whatever, there's some kind of redrawing of borders. That's okay for them. But again, they've got this weird idea, this kind of religious reverence for the sacred United States, which can never be touched. And you can't have a serious conversation when people are going to think in terms of that. But yet you realize that once you break free of these constraints on what you're allowed to think, once you break free of them, so many possibilities open up. So for instance, let's suppose the United States had broken into 2 or 3 separate confederacies, as Thomas Jefferson envisioned that it very well might. Would all of them necessarily have entered World War I? All of them necessarily? Maybe 1 or 2 might have sat out, and that would have changed things, because there is quite a bit of very plausible historical speculation that the deciding factor of the U.S. creating such an overwhelming Allied victory as to be able to impose the Treaty of Versailles helped to lead to the rise of the Nazis. So maybe the 20th century would have looked different. There are all these possibilities that never enter our minds because we've closed our minds to them.
Yeah, not only that, it's also so fascinating to me how the conversation always has to go immediately to violence, that we solve our problems with violence, right? And it was interesting to me to watch how the Dr. Phil show was edited, because it is edited down from what happens live. And I was sort of curious initially, to be like, oh, what's going to happen? And I was like, oh, they left in one of my laugh lines, but they took out my applause line and they took out my other laugh line. And I was like, oh, but, I kind of came with that emphasis of peace. But the metaphor I used, which I probably stole from you over the years, you'll be happy to see I have a giant pile of Secession books here, and I'm like rereading yours currently. But, the argument of the abusive spouse. Now, I have the advantage of being a woman and being able to kind of play into, I guess, if I'm back to my mind control programming thing, I'm able to use that metaphor, I think, in a way that is more successful than if there was a man sort of delivering that message. And, I explained to Dr. Phil, I was like, well, let's say this is an abusive relationship, and he has a psychology background. So it was kind of interesting because I could have that, like, sort of talk him through it. Well, are you saying that, because he was kind of agreeing, yes, the federal government is egregiously big and they're doing all these bad things. So he was agreeing with the abuse argument from a states' rights perspective. Yes, the federal government is overreaching and is not doing constitutional stuff, all of that. Then I said, okay, so we agree that they're basically abusing us. And then I was like, so what have we learned? We've learned you leave your abuser, right? And then I think maybe this part did make it in. I said, because when your partner's like, yo, if you leave me, I'm going to murder you. That is when you leave the relationship. And so I think to some extent, we are actually in a very fortunate situation because one, they don't control all the information avenues anymore. We are out there and our ideas are spreading. And I actually think they're probably going to be shocked at how positive a lot of the comments and stuff are, because people like to think everyone thinks like they do. But I think one of the things we've discovered with the decentralization of mankind is the example that I think I've mentioned before, when you're on an airplane and you kind of watch what everyone, if you're standing at the back at the loo and you look out over the airplane from behind and you see what people are watching, what they're consuming as their entertainment. I do this as just a, like, people are weird kind of experiment. You'll never see anyone watching the same thing. On a 200-person airplane, no one is interested in the same stuff at the same time. And that plays to our favor, because then we can actually start to take these conversations and make the arguments in a way that, Joe Schmo and Karen, hopefully, maybe not, but, that they can start to understand. And so it might sound out there now, but I think over time, it's just going to become a more appealing idea. And, and it's a strategy here in New Hampshire to further those conversations, because, of course, we can do things like nullification, like Michael out with the 10th Amendment Center. I mean, we've done some nullification in New Hampshire. And as I go down this path with Nexit now, I think that is a strategy we should pursue more actively. They spun up a nullification caucus at the State House. They have over 30 members already. So that was this last legislative session. And they're exploring ways how to reduce the influence of, DC over New Hampshire. So maybe we start to go, hey, you know what? The EPA just can't work here. Hey, you know what? The SEC's rules just don't apply here. So if we want to run our crypto companies the way we want to run them, we're going to do that. Hey, we want to have small modular reactors, nuclear reactors. So we're just going to start that, right? And then kind of do it that way. So I think there's a lot of different creative approaches we can take. But for me, I'm like, I'm a lawyer. I know how to negotiate. And I'm like, I'm going to make my anchor as strong as humanly possible. And maybe on accident, I actually create a little country. And that would be awesome, too.
Hey, everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you are getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you are a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. Or what if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking, meeting places getting shut down? Use your website as a lead generation engine. Or what if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO's expert search engine optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. You know, I like the way the analogies that you use when you're explaining this, because unfortunately, being a nerd, my first instinct is to explain the structure of the union and how it was always understood that the states were separate societies, and then that one step leads to the other, leads to the other, leads to the legitimacy of secession. But I think what works with normal people a lot better is analogizing with, as you say, a marriage, or with the way you interact with friends or any other institution. You don't like, if I don't stay a member of your chess club, you're right. You don't send out an army and murder my whole family. It's not how we act in any other context. And, once you get people thinking that way, and then also, you can also get them thinking that way by saying, look, you and I may have completely different views, but what's interesting is that if we said, for example, and Jeff Deist has said this quite a bit, that California could just be a country of its own. California, at least the progressives who live there, could get everything they wanted, just like that overnight. But where I live, could get everything I want. And so instead of fighting with each other all the time, and the only way we can think to proceed is by having a low intensity civil war every 4 years, maybe that's not the best way. Maybe we could each get what we want and enjoy each other from a distance. I mean, again, that's at least a debatable way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I think that, given where politics is now, I mean, I just am like, I'm so over it. The name calling, that just, all of it is just exhausting to me. But it is that way because the federal government is too big. So I've been in the States now for 25 years, I think, ish. And I remember, I honestly, I'm one of those people. I came to America for the American dream. I have my rags to riches, to rags to hopefully someday again riches story and all of that, right? But the American dream is part of, my immigrant story. And I loved it when it came here because really no one was that vested in politics. No one really, it was just kind of like, it's, sort of there. And then it's just ratcheted. And now we're at this insane polarization stage. But the polarization, in my opinion, is highly manufactured. And it is serving the uniparty. It is serving the swamp. It's serving DC. It's serving that 2.3 million unelected bureaucrats who are sitting there and who are making all of our lives miserable. And everyone is vested suddenly because we're being swung between these really wackadoodle extremes. And so even that, I think, is going to play into a successful independence movement here in New Hampshire, because what I'm saying is let's unify granite staters against DC. And I actually think my neighbors, at least, I think the man on the street in New Hampshire is maybe ready to ratchet down some of it and just be like, can we start doing solutions and stop the just nonsensical screaming about everything? So, we put up a petition at NHExitnow.org, and we're basically just asking people to sign up so long. And it's a petition, and literally it's like vote yes on Nexit. So it's a very simple question. But what I'm hoping to do is to actually start the top of the funnel so that we can start to reach out to the people who don't think this is such an outlandish idea. And there are many of them. I mean, I'll tell you, I actually get a better reception sometimes for the independence work than for the Free State Project work, which kind of seems bananas because the independence stuff really appeals a lot to the born and raised ninth generation Granite Staters, right? Like there's this local pride, and I think we can tap into that as well.
So as of now, you have this website, but do you also want to talk about the other project you're working on, or would I be jumping the gun?
The book?
Yes.
No, we should talk about it so that I can shame spiral into actually getting it done before the end of the year.
Okay, all right. Talk to me about it.
So I'm thrilled to announce that I'm working on a book, Nexit Now, subtitle An Appeal to Heaven, which historically, of course, here in New Hampshire and in New England, the greater New England, the Appeal to Heaven flag was one of the original flags. It was an appeal to heaven is a very polite way of saying you have the right of revolution, which is also Article 10 in the New Hampshire Constitution. So we actually have a legal enshrined right to do what I'm doing. So the people who call me an insurrectionist or a traitor, as a fellow Free Stater did in the Daily Mail UK article, which I will be giving him a phone call later this week. So Nexit Now, the book, An Appeal to Heaven, which I believe is going to have a foreword by the great Thomas E. Woods Jr.
Yep.
Thank you. And I think I'm going to try and get that out by the end of the year. I have started sort of dilly-dallying, write a little bit of the history. I mean, obviously, as a lawyer, I'm sort of tempted to go down the legal arguments as well, but I think that might be a trap. I don't think most people care about it. So I'm definitely going to do, a lot of the framing from an abuse perspective, but then also a lot of the framing from an aspirational perspective. I think we're also caught up in everything sucks. And I kind of want to be like, when's the last time you heard someone talk about the American dream? Like, I want to get people back to that because this country is exceptional. This is by far, and I have traveled far and wide in many weird places. And I don't think Americans appreciate how amazing this country is and that it's worth fighting for. But I'm not going to fight it in DC because it's corrupt and immoral, and I think the vested interests there are just, it's too tough. It's too tough a fight. Just from an economic perspective, you are talking about trillions and trillions of dollars, right? I don't have those resources. I'm a guerrilla fighter and I'm just nimble and I have ideas and I can mobilize people. And I want people to aspirationally think, hey, if America was actually, 50 laboratories of states with ideas that were supposed to compete so that we could pick the best ideas instead of this wild swing from the one to the other, right? And some of this is, of course, the electoral there are a lot of reasons why America's whole system isn't currently working. So I want to encourage people in this book to I want to come up with ideas and be like, hey, maybe we could try this, or what do you think about this? And we have Liberty Forum. I got to wear my different hats. The Free State Project, not we. The Free State Project, of course, has its events coming up. So for next year, for Liberty Forum, which will be run by Dennis Pratt, who did PorcFest for a couple of events. And PorcFest is the Porcupine Freedom Festival, and that takes place the third week in June every year. And I actually think tickets might be on sale already. So, but Liberty Forum tickets are definitely on sale. And that's going to be in April, I think the 27th through the 29th. And he's doing this interesting concept where he's talking about liberty in real life, or liberty for real, I guess. So he's looking for white papers and ideas about what the challenges are to build a free society and like what great ideas are. So I'm probably going to submit a paper to that for Nexit. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is I'm also inviting listeners and viewers to go look at nhlibertyforum.com and look at that. And then if they have aspirations or dreams or American dreams or New Hampshire dreams, Granite State dreams about how you could build your own country, what would that look like? I know there are nerds out there who are like, we need competing currencies. I agree. What would that look like? Can we write some model bills? I know we need, better energy policies. What would that look like? Can we get there? So I want to, again, encourage people to think futuristically and stop looking to the past because, first of all, it's past. And second of all, it doesn't serve us anymore. It's not what it was. And we got to try something new. And so let's try something new. So if people like what I have to say here, I guess, it's going to be, we need people to sign up. I need people to buy the book. But then we also need to start to grassroots, talk to the public, go to libraries, go to county fairs, really start to talk to people. But, we did a survey in 2022, and this was an official, from a survey country. And even back then, 63% of Granite State respondents said they trust New Hampshire over DC. So I actually think my base is much larger. And actually, I know that's true because when I talk to just ordinary people, even if I'm doing outreach on some other issue, and you just get a little annoyed at a meeting and you're like, why are we even listening to the feds? The room will erupt. People are on board with this idea. I think the people who don't like this idea is the establishment and the military.
So what do you want people to do after listening to this episode? Is it only people in New Hampshire who can help you?
So a couple of things. So first of all, I am running for office again. So I will be running for state representative as a Republican in District 40, which is a flotirial. So it's a big chunk of Manchester. And for folks who know me or have followed my sort of career over the years, know I've run for Senate. I ran for House last time. I lost by under 200 votes. This is an entirely different district. And, I'm not even sure really what's going to happen there. It's a pretty aggressive PVI. It'll be hard to win, but, who knows? So I am asking people, my first call to action is please donate to my race so that I'm running as an open, independent supporter. I think that this will be my platform going forward, and I'll probably hone and develop it more over time. I am running a campaign, which is just basically called I Heart New Hampshire. I love New Hampshire. I'm framing everything as I love New Hampshire. They're all my local photos. I want to bring a little peace to New Hampshire. I want people to feel pride in living here. It's an incredible state with a great quality of living. And, I'm a real estate agent too, so I'll sell you a house when you move here. But if people can go and donate there, it's at Anadot, which is the big political donation site everyone knows. And the campaign is CGNH/2024. So that'll help me get the word out and start to run as a pro-independence candidate. But that probably will evolve into independent, right? Because New Hampshire's biggest voting base is not Republican or Democrat. I think the Democrats are like 25, 26%, and Republicans are like 27, 28%, or maybe those two are flipped, that are card-carrying party members. So the vast majority of Granite Staters are independents, and I want to become the voice for them, and that starts with actually getting elected so that I can make that my platform in the State House. And this is probably the cheapest race I'll be able to do that in, which is why I'm running for House and not Senate, because that was just too big a swing given the 90 million other things on my to-do list. Then I want everyone to go to nexitnow.org. That is NHExitnow.org, and sign the petition, which just says you vote yes on Nexit. That's all it is. And it really is to get contact information so that we can start to build out those other steps, the public dialogue, doing the education, letters to the editor. I mean, we have introduced constitutional amendments, and we will probably continue to do that. So, writing the legislation and all of that. And then, if the vote goes our way, and this is very important too, I think that people have to understand, if you're pro-democracy, and this is more for the lefties out there, if you're like throwing around the words democracy, 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 you have to actually, from an ethical perspective, I would argue, support this, because this isn't saying, hey, we're writing a bill that says New Hampshire goes its own way. We are saying we give an opportunity to the voters of the Granite State to vote to say whether they want to. So currently, all the State House is doing is they are gatekeepers to putting the question to Granite State voters. So we'll do the dialogue on education. Then we'll probably have that constitutional amendment. My guess would be I've got 8 years. I mean, it depends if, we're going to collapse in 2030 or not. And then we start formal negotiations. And to the folks who are like, how would this work? I'm like, how does Europe work? How does all the other places work? This can totally work. It's just whether you have an appetite or whether you want to be like, nothing can change from 1776. And I say, stuff can change.
Wow, you're good at this, Carla. You really, really are a good spokesman for whatever it is you're trying to get across, and in this case, this particular cause. So I'm glad you're doing it. I think it's a more uphill battle than you may think, but there's no one better to do it. You're really very suited to it. You don't seem threatening. Who would think Carla Gericke is a threatening person? Well,
no one sees me. When they see me, it's too late. So, everyone's going to be like, what happened? I'm going to be like, yep, I told you I was going to make my own country. And I did.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I'll have links for both for your campaign and for this new movement. I'll put them in the video description as well as on the show notes page, which is tomwoods.com/2529. And I think with that, we'll wrap up unless you have any final words.
No, I really always appreciate talking to you. I love coming on your show. So thank you for your time.
Tremendous. Well, thank you so much as always, Carla. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.